Welcome back, everyone, to the Go 247 podcast. I'm Glenn West, the senior writer with the site, joined once again by Dylan Sanders, our contributing writer. Dylan, how's it going, man? It was a pretty late night, I think, for all of us, but especially for those who had to drive to and from the game. LSU and Southern had probably close to 200,000 people, and the traffic absolutely showed it. But you want to expand a little bit about your driving yesterday?
Dude, yeah, it was awful. I left my house in Central, so about 25 minutes ish away from Tiger Stadium, at around like 4, I'd say, to get to LSU, and I got there at about like 6:15. Dude, traffic on Nicholson. They were talking. I rewatched the first half of the game last night, and they were actually they were mentioning the traffic on the broadcast.
Yeah.
They mentioned how long it took them to get off of Nicholson, which is really funny. And yeah, it was insane.
Yep, there were lots of text messages and phone calls between me and Dylan for about 2 hours there on whether or not he'd get to the game in time. But
and those were all in a 2-mile radius.
Yeah.
Which is funny, but it was overall, a good night. A much easier night to talk about LSU winning by 50 than losing by 1 point.
Yeah.
And overall, college football yesterday was insane.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw last night with Baylor BYU, the 4 straight missed kicks or whatever it was insane. Mississippi State Arizona played the most random game that ended at 2 a.m.
Yeah. We'll get into some of the big college games from yesterday, but we definitely want to start off with the one in Death Valley last night. LSU wins 65-17. Before we get into it, though, just make sure you guys are hitting the like button on these videos on YouTube and certainly subscribing to wherever you get your podcast from. But big first win for the Brian Kelly era. Obviously, LSU wins by nearly, I'm trying to do the math in my head, almost 50 points. It was pretty much a flawless start, which was something that I think everybody wanted to see from the Tigers after that kind of a little bit of a disappointment in terms of discipline and execution that we saw against Florida State. So I guess for me to start off with just a couple of quick takeaways that I had from this one. I thought that LSU really came out well and started fast. That was something that we wanted to see. Coach Kelly really talked all week about LSU playing with a sense of urgency, and I think he certainly saw that really from the opening kick when LSU was able to force that fumble on the opening kickoff and really put themselves in a great position to score early. I thought Jaden Daniels, was flawless as a starting quarterback. He 10 of 11, 3 touchdowns, another rushing touchdown for Jaden. Offense did what it was supposed to. Defense did what it was supposed to against a Southern opponent that you really expected LSU to come in and handle quite easily. I'm not sure we expected it to be a historic 37-point first quarter, which is the most points LSU's ever scored in the first quarter. So that had a little bit of a history behind it. But Dylan, I guess just kind of what were your overall takeaways from the game yesterday and just, about this team, I guess, after 2 weeks?
It was a much, much better showing against Southern. And, obviously LSU should have destroyed Southern last night. It shouldn't have been close. But you can never really know in college football. And you still have to come out and execute the game plan. And it seemed to be a perfect game plan for the starters, who they were able to sit 3 minutes into the second quarter, which I don't know if I've ever seen. That was crazy. But yeah, it was overall just a much, much better look. Jaden obviously showed, I think we saw from both quarterbacks last night, why Jaden's the starting quarterback and why there's no quarterback controversy and why, I think we know who the guy is going to be this year.
Yep.
I will say about Jaden, he did have one play where he missed Keyshawn Booty open in the end zone for a touchdown, but it was on the play where he scrambled for a touchdown. So that's really where I'm at with Jaden. He scrambles a lot, but I would rather a quarterback that scrambles a lot but still picks up yards off of it than someone who is a little bit more reckless with the ball, because he is not reckless at all. I mean, no turnovers through 2 games.
No, I think so. And I think one of the signs of growth I think we even saw yesterday was really on that last passing touchdown in particular. He scrambled, the pocket broke down on him for a little bit. He was able to scramble, extend the play. And instead of immediately breaking into his running and, where he probably could have scored an easy touchdown anyway, he looked, in the end zone and he found a wide open Jack Best for about a 16 or 17-yard touchdown. And I think that was a really good sign of growth from him in terms of being able to stay in the pocket, keep your head up, get out of the pocket, and still make that throw really on the run. That was a kind of a awkward throw that he made and was able to complete to Jack Besh, which was really, really impressive to see. I thought he was great. And like he said, I think, after watching both quarterbacks, last night, you really get a sense of why Jaden is going to be the starter here. Nussmeier had his moments, but he also, there were 2 plays there that really just are kind of unforgivable in those 2 interceptions in terms of just discipline. And, those were 2 plays that Nussmeier really told us that he's worked really all offseason to try to eliminate. And so, he's still a young quarterback. He still doesn't have a lot of experience under his belt. And that might've been a situation where, the backup was just trying to do a little bit too much in a blowout game, blowout situation. But to have a 94-yard interception return against you there, on a Southern team that hadn't scored the whole game yet. So that was a little bit disappointing to see from Nussmeier. I was also very interested, and we can touch on this a little bit about some of the personnel changes they made yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
They went with a different look on the offensive line. They had Miles Frazier at right tackle. They had Charles Turner at center. And they had Garrett Dellinger at left guard with Bradford at right guard and Will Campbell at left tackle. That was a different look than we had seen kind of the last, couple weeks of fall camp.
I'd say ever.
Yeah. Well, we had seen back in the spring that Charles Turner was, getting a lot of the reps at center because I don't think they had figured that out yet. And Dellinger was getting a lot of looks at guard. But back in the spring, they had not settled in on any kind of consistent rotation. And so when they got back in the fall, I thought that was, a really interesting kind of development there. Coach Kelly said after the game, they liked the smarts that Charles Turner brings to the center position. There was certainly a calmness that I think that he brought that LSU really liked. They liked the big physicality that Miles Frazier can bring at the right tackle spot. And they like the same thing with Dellinger on the inside at guard. They think he has a lot of athleticism that can help them there at guard. So I would probably expect that to be a pretty consistent rotation moving forward. It worked really well against Southern. We'll see how well it works against a SEC opponent next week against Mississippi State. But, they had a couple other changes in there. Was there anything that really kind of, stood out to you? I know Harold Perkins was one, and then they had some secondary changes as well. Just talk about, some of the things that might have stood out to you in terms of their personnel.
Yeah, I was really glad to see them actually use Harold Perkins as that jack linebacker a little bit with Bijou Jalari out of the game. And another person who I think given more of a spotlight really showed out was Micah Baskerville. I think Micah Baskerville certainly earned extra playing time as he did have that pick 6, which was just a really good play by him. And then the blocked punt on special teams. So with him being given a bigger role, he definitely took advantage of that. And I think that's kind of what Micah Baskerville has always been. He's more of a gamer. Like you can never question his production in the game. So I think they just needed to get him playing more than like 15 snaps or whatever he played last week. I think it was less than that last week.
He played like 6, I think.
Yeah, he played like six snaps last week. You give him some more playing time, give him some opportunity to show. And I think they could. I think we'll see a lot more Micah Baskerville against Mississippi State.
No, I agree, and I think probably one of the things that I was looking at defensively, or one of the questions that I had kind of internally was, what does LSU do now that they've lost probably their best athlete of their entire defense in Mason Smith, and how do they go about maybe not recreating him, but just finding ways to get a lot of their athletes out on the field at the same time. And I think you kind of saw it yesterday with Perkins playing that more kind of edge rusher role. He was able to get into the backfield a couple times. He had about 7 tackles. I think he led the team in tackles yesterday. I was really interested to see how they would look for, in their formations. That they had a bunch of times there where they lined up with 3 down linemen, and then they had Perkins on the outside. They had Savion Jones standing up a lot last night, which I thought was really interesting. Instead of having his feet kind of in the ground, his hands in the ground. I really liked what they did. Again, it's against Southern, so you can only take that with as much a grain of salt as you can. But there's some things there that if you're able to get your athletes out on the field, I think LSU has a really good opportunity here to show just how potent they can be defensively. I think there's a lot of things that they can work with schematically moving forward. With having an extra linebacker, having an extra member of the secondary out there, I think you can do a lot more with your defense going forward.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that they showed a little bit differently on offense as well. You saw a much more concerted effort to get Keyshawn Booty the ball early, and it worked out. He got open a lot. He had a rush for 41 yards on that end around. That was, a player like Keyshawn, you have to get him the ball as many ways as possible. That's just kind of where football is going. The 49ers kind of revolutionized it, but I think we'll see Keyshawn getting used a lot of different ways. I don't think we're gonna see another issue like we saw the first week, the first game together. That it wasn't about like getting one person the ball, but having Keyshawn get involved early really does open up so much more for you to do.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I asked Jaden, after the game just about the concerted effort of getting Keyshawn the ball, and he pretty much told me, like, an athlete like that, you have to get him the ball. You got to get him his touches in any way possible, and that was a really good thing to see LSU kind of go to him early, really establish themselves early in that first quarter, and really kind of get the starters off the field there by the early part of the second quarter, which was really nice. I also wanted to touch on the running backs a little bit. I thought it was really nice they were able to get the running game going a little bit more than they did last week. Again, you take everything with a grain of salt, given that it's Southern, but I thought that Armani Goodwin had some really physical runs between the tackles. I thought he looked really good. I thought that Noah Cain had a couple of good moments out there as well. So just getting more balance to the offense, I think, is something LSU is going to want to try to do here in the next several weeks. Really establish their identity in being a solid run team. And now you get John Emery back. I think Emery's going to be able to provide a nice little change of pace in terms of what he can do out of the backfield, not only as a runner, but as a pass catcher as well. He was suspended those 2 games, but it sounds like LSU's kept him very involved the last couple of weeks of practice. So he's going to be ready to go against Mississippi State. And I think that's going to be a really big tool for them to utilize in that game.
Yeah, and we saw the running game opening it up for the receivers. We saw Chris Hilton have a great game, who tied the team in receptions. And again, Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas looked really good. Brian Thomas has been, I think, the surprise of the season. That dude gets open and has looked really, really good through 2 games so far.
Yeah, he had a nice double move yesterday for almost went for a touchdown that he got one of the Southern cornerbacks on. Yeah, he's somebody you got to utilize. You got to utilize all these receivers, and they did a nice job spreading the ball around yesterday, I thought, which was good, which was what you wanted to see against a team like Southern. So, I guess with that, I mean, that was pretty much all the big takeaways we had from the game. I do think we should probably touch on just maybe the craziness of yesterday in terms of college football and why it was so nice to see LSU not have any problems, really from the get-go. You had a number of upsets yesterday. Texas A&M losing. You had Baylor losing late in the night. You had Notre Dame kicking it off with a crazy loss as well. Just absolute chaos against really some a couple group kind of FCS teams that they were playing too. So
there were 4 FCS teams that beat FBS teams yesterday, which is
not
crazy.
just FBS teams, but highly regarded FBS teams as well. So I mean, what was your takeaway just from the day in general yesterday, and why this sport can be so crazy?
Yeah, I mean, App State, good for App State, beating Texas A&M. Really just, I don't know. And I think so one of the bigger winners of yesterday was Brian Kelly. Brian Kelly wasn't Notre Dame's problem. Not that I think he ever really was Notre Dame's problem, but it really showed in yesterday because Brian Kelly would never lose to Marshall at home with that team. It never happened while he was there. I don't think there's any evidence pointing to the fact that it would happen.
No.
Yeah, that was awesome. I mean, that was awesome. Shout out Marshall. We are Marshall. Baylor BYU last night was crazy. One of the bigger games that I think that has an impact on LSU is Kentucky beating Florida and Anthony Richardson reverting back. That dude is
to last year. Yeah.
The dude is he's either Cam Newton or Brandon Harris. There's no in between.
Yeah. There's that really funny meme that goes around where it's the stock market poll or something where it's just up and down, up and down, up and down. I mean, I feel like Anthony Richardson is just on that spectrum. You don't know which version you're going to get week in and week out with him. But, I thought that was a really interesting game. Like you said, Bama certainly kept it interesting with Texas to kind of kick things off as well. That was, to see Nick Saban's squad, kind of have the most penalties that they've had since he's been there. That was really eye-opening, I think, just in terms of what that team's potential looks like, this season. It certainly sounds like they have some discipline things that they got to work out penalty-wise. I think we're going to learn a lot about LSU, and we'll touch on it, I guess, starting now. But this first game against Mississippi State, this first SEC game against Mississippi State, I think is going to show us a lot of just how much maybe this team has come in 2 weeks. We'll get a really good look at this secondary. They're going to be tested a lot. We know that Mike Leach and the air raid offense is nothing to joke at, nothing to sneeze at. So I guess just looking at this first SEC game, what are some early takes that I guess you have, or some early matchups you're going to be looking at for this first Mississippi State game?
Yeah, Mississippi State, they kind of struggled a little bit with Arizona for the first 3 quarters and then really pushed away in the fourth quarter. This is definitely a tough first SEC game. They're not going to be ranked, so maybe people won't take it as seriously as it will be, but this is a talented Mississippi State team. Actually, they might be ranked after yesterday. Who knows? It's up in the air.
Yeah, there's so many teams that lost yesterday. They might get in. Yeah,
sneak in by the chin, by the hair on their chinny chin. But Will Rogers obviously very accurate. Runs that system very, very well. I mean, he had 40 completions yesterday for 300 yards. That shows you they are going to attack the short yardage game. That's what they did last year against LSU. That's what they still do. That's just what Michael Leach does. They use their passing game as their rushing game, really. They don't try to push it down the field too much. They had their longest reception last night was for 20 yards. So They really don't do much. You know what you're going to get, and it's always the question of will Mike Leach's offense work in the SEC, because it's a little bit easier to game plan for. Like, you know what's going to happen. There's not going to be any surprises, but it's going to come down to execution, because LSU is going to have to execute, because it is an easy game to let slip out of your hands if you just let Mississippi State do whatever you want. I mean, we saw them pass for 700 yards against LSU 2 years ago. So it's just something where you're going to have to come out and play smart and play physical, and you get to the quarterback.
No, I agree. You know, we kind of had this conversation on our board in the offseason, but just what's one game that maybe not enough people are talking about that you think could give LSU some trouble? And my first answer was Mississippi State. I mean, we've seen it the last 2 years. LSU's had some struggles against that team. They just narrowly escaped last year with a 3-point win, on the road. But, look, Will Rogers threw it 62 times last year against LSU. I think the year that they threw it all over the secondary in 2020, they had close to 50 passing attempts. So you know what this game is going to be. It's going to highlight LSU's secondary, how much those guys can we heard about the communication errors with the safeties, after the first week. How much can they shore that up against Mississippi State? Because you really, really can't afford to have communication be an issue next week against Mississippi State. There's just no way. And I thought, look, the cornerbacks, Jark Bernard-Converse, Colby Richardson, Mekhi Garner, they've all looked pretty solid, I think, through 2 weeks. But
Major Burns had a really good day yesterday.
Yeah, Major had a nice night last night. But this is going to be a real test. This is going to be really the gauge of which you really look at this secondary, I think, looking, at this season. And I think it's going to be a really big week for those guys. They're going to have to really lock in practice and have a good game plan for Mississippi State. I think that's going to be a really interesting matchup to follow really throughout the week, and certainly on Saturday as well.
KJ Costello threw 60 times against LSU.
60? Okay, so the last 2 years, LSU has gotten thrown against 60 plus times against Mississippi State quarterbacks. So that's what what to expect with this team. I know they ran it a little bit more last night. I'm not sure if that was just how the game developed, but I know that they had about 23, 24, 25 rushes, something like that total. But they're gonna rely heavily on that passing attack, and it's going to be on LSU's secondary to really have a good game plan for those guys. So I guess with that, I think that's pretty much all we wanted to touch on this morning. Dylan, I'm glad we get to get our sleep in a little bit more. We get to watch a little bit of Saints football on this Sunday. I know that's something we're both really looking forward to, but we'll
some LSU Tigers making their debuts.
Yes, absolutely.
Did you see? Yeah, Tyrann Mathieu was warming up in a Deion Sanders shirt.
I didn't see that.
In Atlanta. So
wow, major shade being thrown by the Honey Badger there. But wouldn't have it any other way. So,
nope.
With that, we'll get you guys out of here. Like I said, make sure you guys are liking and subscribing on YouTube and all of our podcast forums. But with that, I'm Glenn West. He's Dylan Sanders, and we'll certainly see you guys very soon.